On November the 13th in 2022, 4 students from the University of Idaho were found murdered in their home. And underneath one of these victims, the police would find a USMC Ka Bar leather sheath. Now, people over time have discussed the significance of this weapon to the individual, but have spoken little about the significance of the weapon to the crime. The individual apprehended has a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's in criminal justice, and was attaining a P.H.D. in criminology. So I think the significance in its value to the individual when it comes to the weapon used becomes its capabilities. How was the crime that took place so quick? Why wasn't there blood everywhere? And why didn't they make much noise when being attacked? Well, when it comes to just facts alone about the Ka Bar, I think these questions kind of just answer themselves. Now, there is a lot at play here. When it comes to the noise, the first 2 individuals were asleep and had been drinking that night. So the attack's main value there is actually the element of surprise. Being in a bed too means that they're also under a duvet. The attacker was almost already protected from blood, seeing as it would seep into there before the mattress, then the floor. The police have said that this crime was something that they referred to as a controlled crime scene, meaning that there was a lot of blood, but in the rooms in which the crimes took place. The perpetrator didn't stay or hang around in those rooms, so blood was more than likely still forming as the next attack took place. Then in the next attack, forming again as the attacker then exits the home. There are a lot of variables and other factors that come into play here, so without going into too much detail, let's just take a second to focus on the Ka Bar used in the attack. So there are all different types of Ka Bars and all different types of ranges, but the one that we're going to focus on is the USMC version, the Ka Bar designed for the United States Marine Corps. And how this knife even got its name in the first place is just nuts to say the least. The Ka Bar's name dates back to the early 1900s from a fur trapper's testimonial, and he wrote that while trapping, his gun jammed, leaving him with only his knife to kill a wounded bear that was attacking him. A bear he would later skin and send to the President of the United States at the time. But he would go on to thank the Union Cutlery Company for making the quality knife that helped him to kill a bear. But at the time, all that was legible for this knife was Ka Bar, which later would be referred to as kill a bear. Honoured by this testimonial, the company then adopted the phrase Ka Bar as their trademark. On December 9th, 1942, after the start of World War II, Ka Bar submitted a knife to the United States Marine Corps in hopes that it would become a general issue to that branch of the military. Working with the Marine Quartermaster Department, the original design was revised and production began of an improved fighting and utility knife for the Marines. USMC Ka Bar was adopted by not only the Marines, but also the Army, Navy, Coast Guard, and underwater demolition teams. Years after World War II, many Ka Bar knives were unofficially reactivated in the Korean, Vietnam, Desert Storm, and Iraqi freedom conflicts. Today, the original USMC fighting and utility knife remains the first choice for many men and women of service who carry it as their personal knife option. And there's a reason for this. When using a typical knife, for example, the cold blade, once it enters the hot skin and blood, makes a suction-like effect to the blade, which can sometimes make it hard to pull out and can actually cause the knife to get stuck. The Ka Bar, on the other hand, does not have this issue. It has something on it that's called a blood gutter, which reduces weight and doesn't get caught by suction when you stab someone. And this in turn creates a fatally clean cut. Not only that, but over the years it's also been redesigned to deal with things like cutting through bone. Even, for example, if this knife was dull. I did speak briefly with someone who's actually studied sharp force trauma in forensic anthropology that also owns a Ka Bar, and they explained that usually kitchen knives would break under this type of stress, but a Ka Bar simply wouldn't. The Ka Bar is actually designed to endure under distress. It is a hardened piece of solid steel anodized with cold bluing, and it's also wrapped in a leather grip to prevent slipping. It is heavy, and it is lethal. It can cut through ribs and breastplate bone very easily. This knife was specifically designed for combat against other humans, and they can almost guarantee that knife is just as sharp and intact as the day the individual bought it. The Ka Bar also has something between the handle and the blade that's called a hilt, and this is something to help the person using it to prevent them from slipping and cutting themselves during an attack. Back in 2022, CCTV footage was released of a Las Vegas shop owner when he was attacked by 2 would-be robbers. The attack attack lasted 7 seconds. The individual attacked was stabbed a total of 7 times, and in those 7 seconds was able to shout once, before the body's natural reaction took over and he went silent. Adrenaline was in play during this attack. The robber involved would have been operating off a high intensity from the knowledge of what was about to go down, and even while trying to fend for his life, defend himself, being aware and awake, this attack lasts a total of just 7 seconds, with the individual being stabbed multiple times. On the 20th of June in Reading, the UK, Kahari Sadlar stabbed 3 men to death in 30 seconds with one fatal blow to the back of each of the victims' heads. But these individuals in these attacks weren't using something like a Ka-Bar. So when it comes to 2022, could one man using a Ka-Bar kill 2 girls asleep, intoxicated, unaware and in the element of surprise in mere minutes? Well, yes. In this case, minutes are more than enough. Could the attack be so quick that they couldn't gather their thoughts to even scream? And if they could they even scream dependent on the areas of attack? If a Ka-Bar can cut through bone, it can certainly go through the individual's lungs, which would stop any screaming from even being possible, making the quick timing and lack of noise confusing to anyone unaware as to what was happening upstairs, leading to one of the surviving roommates to believe it was Kaylee and Maddie playing with the dog and not a fatal attack. After this attack, it's believed that crying was somewhat heard, which could have been the perpetrator entering the room of Xana and Ethan. The shock of this to Xana is the potential reason that we're even hearing crying in the first place. But again, another quick, violent and quiet attack takes place down the hallway from one of the survivors, with one hand free and another hand holding the Ka-Bar. I wonder if when he entered Xana's room and she began to cry, it was then which he said, "Don't worry, I'm here to help you," only to get close enough to her to use the hand that was free to cover her mouth as he fatally stabs her, or using his hand to cover Xana's mouth, fatally stabs her, only to then simultaneously attack Ethan as well, before the individual then exits that home. Now, the individual that entered that home was prepared for an efficient attack, and the individual apprehended even told Washington Police Department that he could show them how to better access and analyze data from crime scenes. But what the individual was not prepared for was the chaos that ensues when you initiate war. Both sides can show their intellect, show all their new shiny toys and equipment, and somewhat tip their hand to strategy, but once that fight begins, chaos ensues and all strategy goes out the window. So as prepared as they may have been for the night in question, they certainly weren't prepared for the weeks ahead. Anyway, this was just some interesting facts about the weapon that was used in this attack, and I do hope that some of this could help with better understanding. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, drop a like and a follow as it always helps out the channel, and enjoy the rest of your week.